News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.
All right, buckle up, everybody. Today, we are diving into a story that has gotten some global attention.
Yeah, should be interesting.
You've sent me some news articles about Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines.
Oh, yeah.
And his possible issues with the ICC, the International Criminal Court.
Right. Big stuff.
Yeah, and let me tell you, these articles, they really paint different pictures of what's happening. I mean, the big question seems to be, did Duterte... did he hop on a plane to Hong Kong to avoid an arrest?
Strategically avoid.
To avoid, an arrest warrant from the ICC?
From the ICC, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, the timing of this trip to Hong Kong, it is pretty suspicious,
Yeah.
As soon as the news about the possible warrant came out, he's suddenly on a plane.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that officially, he's there for a Thanksgiving event, right? To thank the Filipino workers abroad.
Right. A convenient coincidence.
Maybe. But some people are saying, it looks a lot like an escape attempt,
Yeah, some say it's a calculated escape attempt.
Yeah.
So, now, we both know a lot about the ICC and its role in investigating these crimes against humanity. So let's focus on why they might be interested in Duterte in the first place.
Okay, yeah.
He's well known, shall we say, for his controversial war on drugs. Which,
Yeah, his tactics have been a little aggressive, to say the least.
Yeah, aggressive is one way to put it.
The ICC is focused on what they call crimes against humanity, and they're looking at the thousands of deaths connected to Duterte's drug crackdown.
Yeah, right.
The really interesting thing here, and it's fascinating actually, is that the Philippine government officially says that around 6,000 people died.
6,000.
6,000.
In police operations during this drug war.
Yeah, in police operations.
Right.
But human rights groups, they're estimating the real number is much higher, could be closer to 30,000.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, a massive difference. And that gap, it kind of shows that there might be a lack of transparency and accountability, right, from the Philippine government during that time.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, it raises some serious questions. Were all those deaths investigated properly?
Right.
Did they try to downplay the real human cost of this whole campaign? These are things we need to think about.
And amidst all of this, I came across this quote from Duterte while he was speaking in Hong Kong. He said, "Whatever my sins may be, I did them to bring some peace and security to the Filipino people."
Wow.
It's a powerful statement. Do you think peace and security, do you think that can ever justify such a high cost?
It's a tough question, really. No easy answers. It makes us think about, the balance between security and human rights.
Right.
Duterte supporters, they say he was dealing with a huge drug crisis, right? Like a threat to the whole nation. They believed that his actions, even though they were controversial, they were necessary to restore order and protect the people. That's their argument.
And of course, you have Duterte's lawyer who denies any attempt to escape.
Right.
He says the Hong Kong trip was planned way in advance.
Planned all along.
But let's say, just for a second, that the ICC, they do issue a warrant. What would happen?
Well, that's the thing. They don't have, their own police force, right?
No, right. They don't have their own SWAT team or anything.
Right, exactly. So they rely on Interpol and cooperation from member countries.
And this is where it gets interesting. Because the Philippines, they actually withdrew from the ICC under Duterte's presidency.
Yeah, they did. They pulled out. But here's the thing. The current administration, they've said they're willing to engage with the ICC now.
So there's a chance they might cooperate.
It's possible. The Philippines Department of Justice, they've actually said they'll respond to ICC requests, but only if they come through Interpol.
So we're basically in a waiting game at this point. There's no official warrant, and we don't know how the Philippine government is going to react.
Right, exactly. We're waiting to see what happens next.
But wait, there's another twist to this story.
Oh.
Duterte's former police chief, who's now a senator, he's implicated in this ICC case too.
Oh, wow. So this case, it goes way beyond Duterte himself.
It does.
This is about international justice, about the power dynamics between nations. It's a big deal.
And to add to the confusion, the Solicitor General of the Philippines said, "We have not received any notice or communication from the ICC regarding the matter."
So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about.
It seems like it.
A lot of mystery. It makes you wonder what's really going on, right? Behind the scenes, I mean.
Yeah.
This case, it could have some ripple effects, setting a precedent for how the ICC deals with countries trying to avoid accountability by withdrawing from the court.
Yeah, like a legal game of hide and seek.
Exactly. On the world stage, and the stakes they're incredibly high. We're talking about justice, we're talking about accountability, and the very foundation of international law is at play here.
And we can't forget about the human cost, right? I mean, there are thousands of families in the Philippines who are still looking for justice for their loved ones.
Absolutely. Their voices need to be heard.
Yeah.
Their stories deserve to be acknowledged, for sure.
This whole thing just highlights how complex international justice is, If the ICC can't actually enforce its warrants, what message does that send?
That's the big question. If they can't act, it could weaken their authority.
Right.
And it could discourage future investigations.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if they do hold Duterte accountable, that would be huge.
Yeah.
It would be a major precedent showing that even heads of state, that they're not above the law.
That would be a landmark decision.
It would. It would send a really strong signal that the international community is serious about human rights.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge that it could also cause some backlash, some political backlash.
Yeah.
And it could even destabilize the Philippines. It's a complicated situation.
It's a really delicate balancing act.
It is.
With huge consequences.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that quote from Duterte. "Whatever my sins may be, I did them to bring some peace and security to the Filipino people." It's a pretty stark justification. It really makes you think about the ethics of it all.
It does. It forces us to ask some tough questions. Like, is it ever okay to sacrifice human rights in the name of security? Where do we draw the line? These are questions that have been debated for centuries.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend from the Philippines who lived through all of this. He talked about the fear, how everyone was afraid during the drug war. But he also admitted that there was a sense of relief when crime went down.
Yeah, it's such a complex issue, so many different perspectives.
It really highlights the challenge of trying to understand these big geopolitical issues,
There are always multiple sides to the story, each with their own justifications and arguments.
And it's on us as informed citizens to try and understand those different sides,
Absolutely.
even if we don't agree with them.
It's about having those difficult conversations and understanding the nuances of these situations.
So let's dig into the specifics of the allegations against Duterte and his former police chief. What exactly is the ICC investigating?
Well, they're looking into crimes against humanity, specifically murder and other inhumane acts.
Okay.
Their investigation is centered on the killings that happened during Duterte's war on drugs, the widespread and systematic killings.
So it's not just about individual cases, but a pattern of state-sanctioned violence.
Exactly. The ICC's argument is that these killings weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a deliberate policy orchestrated by the government.
And what evidence do they have to back that up?
They've been gathering a lot of evidence, testimonies from victims, from witnesses, even from former members of the Philippine police.
Wow.
They're also looking at documents, reports from human rights organizations, anything they can get their hands on to build their case.
It sounds like a pretty thorough investigation. But how strong is their case, really?
It's hard to say for sure at this point, but, the ECC wouldn't have started an investigation if they didn't think there was enough evidence.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge the arguments from Duterte's supporters.
Of course.
They say he was just doing what he had to do to protect the Filipino people.
Yeah, they believed that the drug problem was so bad that it was a real threat to the nation.
Yeah.
And they see Duterte as a strong leader, someone who took action to restore order and keep people safe.
So they see him as someone who maybe he used some controversial methods, but he was doing it for the good of the country.
Exactly. And they point to the fact that crime did go down during his presidency.
Right.
They see that as proof that he was effective.
But then you have the human rights groups who say those gains came at a terrible cost, a human cost.
Absolutely. They argue that many of the people who were killed were innocent civilians, often from poor communities,
Yeah.
caught in the crossfire. Their perspective highlights the tragedy of this drug war, the impact it had on families, on individuals. It's just heartbreaking.
It is. It really underscores the need for justice and accountability.
It seems almost impossible to reconcile these two sides. How do you even make sense of something so complex and morally challenging?
That's the thing about these geopolitical issues. They're rarely black and white. There are always multiple perspectives, each with its own logic.
Yeah.
It requires us to think critically, to look at the evidence, and to consider the context.
It's a call to be informed, to be engaged, and to be compassionate.
Yes, to be willing to wrestle with these tough questions.
So where do we go from here? What's the next chapter in this story?
Well, the ICC has made it clear that they're going to pursue this case. They already rejected the Philippines' attempt to block the investigation.
So it's a standoff.
It could be. The ICC might issue an arrest warrant for Duterte, and that would put the Philippine government in a tough spot.
They'd have to make a choice. Cooperate with the ICC or defy them and face international condemnation.
A choice with some serious consequences. It's a lot to think about. It feels like this is just the beginning.
This case is a reminder that the fight for justice is never easy.
It's a long and winding road. As we've been talking about this, there's one thing that keeps coming back to me. The Philippines' withdrawal from the ICC back in 2019. It seems pretty relevant now.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was a big moment. Duterte decided to pull the Philippines out of the ICC right after they started looking into the drug war.
It was like he was saying, you can't touch me if I'm not a member anymore. It was a bold move.
Yeah, it was. And it made people worry that other countries might do the same thing. It could really weaken the ICC's authority.
But the ICC says their jurisdiction still applies to crimes that happened while the Philippines was a member.
Right, that's their position. You can't just erase your past obligations by withdrawing. It's like, you can quit a game, but you're still responsible for the moves you made while you were playing.
That's a good analogy. So even though the Philippines isn't part of the ICC anymore, they're not totally off the hook.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting. It could set a precedent for how the ICC handles situations where a country tries to dodge accountability.
Like a global game of legal chess with some really high stakes.
You got it. This case goes deep, into questions of justice, accountability, the very heart of international law. What happens here could have big implications for a long time.
This deep dive has been quite a ride. We've covered the accusations against Duterte, the ICC investigation, the Philippines leaving the court, all the ethical and legal angles. There's so much to process.
It really is a lot to take in. But I think the key thing to remember is that this case goes beyond Duterte himself. It's about the pursuit of justice, the limits of power, and the constant fight for human rights around the world.
It's a story that we all need to pay attention to. And as it unfolds, we'll be here to keep you updated. But in the meantime, we encourage you to keep learning about this, to look at different points of view, and to come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, don't stop here. There's a whole world of information out there about international justice, human rights, and all the complexities of global politics.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.